Chapter 2 of The Duke of Chimney Butte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Duke of Chimney Butte by G.W. Ogden. Chapter 2. Whetstone the Outlaw. When Taterleg roused the camp before the east was light, Lambert noted that another man had ridden in. This was a wiry young fellow with a short nose and fiery face, against which his scant eyebrows and lashes were as white as chalk. His presence in the camp seemed to put a restraint on the spirit of the others, some of whom greeted him by the name Jim, others ignoring him entirely. Among these latter was the black-haired man who had given Lambert his title and elevated him to the nobility of the Badlands. On the face of it, there was a crow to be picked between them. Jim was belted with a pistol and heeled with a pair of those long-roweled Mexican spurs, such as had gone out of fashion on the western range long before this day. He leaned on his elbow near the fire, his legs stretched out in a way that obliged Taterleg to walk round the spurred boots as he went between his cooking and the supplies in his wagon, the tailboard of which was his kitchen table. If Taterleg resented this lordly obstruction, he did not discover it by word or feature. He went on humming a tune without words as he worked, handing out biscuits and ham to the hungry crew. Jim had eaten his breakfast already and was smoking a cigarette at his ease. Now and then he addressed somebody in obscene jocularity. Lambert saw that Jim turned his eyes on him now and then with sneering contempt, but said nothing. When the men had made a hasty end of their breakfast, three of them started to the corral. The young man who had humorously enumerated the virtues of the all-in-one, whom the others called Spence, was of this number. He turned back, offering Lambert his hand with a smile. "Glad to meet you, Duke, and I hope you'll do well wherever you travel," he said, with such evident sincerity and good feeling that Lambert felt like he was parting from a friend. "Thanks, old feller, and the same to you." Spence went on to saddle his horse, whistling as he scruffed through the low sage. Jim sat up. "I'll make you whistle through your ribs," he snarled after him. It was Sunday. These men who remained in camp were enjoying the infrequent luxury of a day off. With the first gleam of morning they got out their razors and shaved, and Siwash, who seemed to be the handy man and chief counselor of the outfit, cut everybody's hair with the exception of Jim, who had just returned from somewhere on the train and still had the scent of the barber shop on him, and Taterleg, who had mastered the art of shingling himself, had kept his hand in by constant practice. Lambert mended his tire, using an old rubber boot that Taterleg found kicking around the camp, to plug the big hole in his outer tube. He was going on then, but Siwash and the others pressed him to stay over the day, to which invitation he yielded without great argument. There was nothing ahead of him but desolation, said Taterleg, a country so rough that it tried a horse to travel it. Ranch houses were further apart as a man proceeded, and beyond that, mountains. It looked to Taterleg as if he'd better give it up. That was so according to the opinion of Siwash. To his undoubted knowledge, covering the history of 24 years, no agent ever had penetrated that far before. Having broken his record on a bicycle, Lambert ought to be satisfied. If he was bound to travel, said Siwash, his advice would be to travel back. It seemed to Lambert that the bottom was all out of his plans indeed. It would be far better to chuck the whole scheme overboard and go to work as a cowboy if they would give him a job. That was nearer the sphere of his intended future activities. That was getting down to the root and foundation of a business which had a ladder in it, whose rungs were not made of any general agent's hot air. After his hot and heady way of quick decisions and planning to completion before he even had begun, Lambert was galloping the Badlands as superintendent of somebody's ranch, having made the leap over all the trifling years, with the trifling details of hardship, low wages, loneliness, and isolation in a wink. From superintendent he galloped swiftly, on his fancy, to a white ranch house by some calm riverside, his herds around him, his big hat on his head, market quotations coming to him by telegraph every day, packers appealing to him to ship 5 trainloads at once to save their government contracts. What is the good of an imagination if a man cannot write it? and feel the wind in his face as he flies over the world, even though it is a liar and a trickster and a rifler of time which a drudge of success would be stamping into gold. It is better for a man than wine. He can return from his wide excursions with no deeper injury than a sigh. Lambert came back to the reality, broaching the subject of a job. Here Jim took notice and cut into the conversation, it being his first word to the stranger. "Sure, you can get a job, Bud," he said, coming over to where Lambert sat with Siwash and Taterleg, the latter peeling potatoes for a stew, somebody having killed a calf. "The old man needs a couple of hands. He told me to keep my eye open for anybody that wanted a job." "I'm glad to hear of it," said Lambert, warming up at the news, feeling that he must have been a bit severe in his judgment of Jim, which had not been altogether favorable. "He'll be over in the morning. You'd better hang around." Seeing the foundation of a new fortune taking shape, Lambert said he would hang around. They all applauded his resolution, for they all appeared to like him in spite of his appearance, which was distinctive indeed among the somber colors of that sage-gray land. Jim inquired if he had a horse, the growing interest of a friend in his manner. Hearing the facts of the case from Lambert before dawn, he had heard them from Taterleg. He appeared concerned, almost to the point of being troubled. "You have to get a horse, Duke. You'll have to ride up to the boss when you hit him up for a job. He never was known to hire a man off the ground, and I guess if you was to head at him on that bicycle, he'd blow a hole through you as big as a can of salmon. Any of you fellers got a horse you want to trade the Duke for his bicycle?" The inquiry brought out a round of somewhat cloudy witticism, with proposals to Lambert for an exchange on terms rather embarrassing to meet, seeing that even the least preposterous was not sincere. Taterleg winked to assure him that it was all banter, without a bit of harm at the bottom of it, which Lambert understood very well without the service of a commentator. Jim brightened up presently as he saw a gleam that might lead Lambert out of the difficulty. He had an extra horse himself, not much of a horse to look at, but as good-hearted a horse a man could ever throw the leg over, and that wasn't no lie, if you took him the right side on. But you had to take him the right side on, and humor him, to handle him like eggs till he got used to you. Then you had as purty a little horse as man ever throwed the leg over anywhere. Jim said he'd offer that horse, only he was a little bashful in the presence of strangers, meaning the horse, and didn't show up in a style to make his owner proud of him. The trouble with that horse was he used to belong to a one-legged man, and got so accustomed to the feel of a one-legged man on him that he was plumb foolish between two legs. That horse didn't have much style to him, and no gait to speak of, but he was as good a cow horse as ever chawed a bit. If the Duke thought he'd be able to ride him, he was welcome to him. Taterleg winked, what Lambert interpreted as a warning at that point, and in the faces of the others there were little gleams of humor, which they turned their heads or bent to study the ground, as Siwash did, to hide. "Well, I'm not much on a horse," Lambert confessed. "You look like a man that had been on a horse a time or two," said Jim, with a knowing inflection, a shrewd flattery. "I used to ride around a little, but it's been a good while ago." "A feller never forgets how to ride," Siwash put in, "and if a man wants to work on the range he's got to ride, less'n he goes and gets him a job running sheep, and that's below any man that is a man." Jim sat pondering the question, hands hooked in front of his knees, a match in his mouth beside his unlighted cigarette. "I've been thinking I'd sell that horse," he said reflectively. "Ain't got no use for him much, but I don't know." He looked off over the chuck wagon through the tops of the scrub pines, in which the camp was set, drawing his thin, white eyebrows, considering the case. "Winter comin' and hay to buy," said Siwash. "That's what I've been thinking and studying over. Shucks, I don't need that horse. Tell you what I'll do, Duke," turning to Lambert, brisk as with a gush of sudden generosity. "If you can ride that old pelter, I'll give him to you for a present, and I bet you'll not get as cheap an offer of a horse as that ever in your life again." "I think it's too generous. I wouldn't want to take advantage of it," Lambert told him, trying to show a modesty in the manner that he did not feel. I ain't a favorin'